So maybe what we could do as a way of starting is do some tuning in to the student groups you're about to lead. I want to thank a couple of you, by the way. You sent in emails where you listed what you thought would be some of the issues. You were right on target. Rather than going through them, I'd like to have you share them yourself. Let's do some tuning in. Put yourself in the shoes of the students that you're about to be connecting with, the ones who are going to be in these peer support groups that you're going to be leading. And you are in their shoes. That's one of the powerful issues right now. You are in their shoes, but you have a different role as the peer support leader. Tune in a little bit. What are these students going through right now that might be issues that would be helpful to have some mutual aid, some support? What are you going through right now? Because they're probably the very same issues. Let's take a little time and do that, all right? And feel free to jump in. Yeah. This is the preparatory work before your first session, actually.
I think one thing that makes me anxious is not knowing or not having a clear timeline in terms of what's going to happen. When will this be over?
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
And each week we get a different message. I'm tuning in now too. And how do I trust the messages I'm getting? Because some of the messages I'm getting, if I turn on that TV one more time, I'm just going to throw something through it. So uncertainty. I'm feeling that. You know, I am actually 83 years old. I know that's stunning, right? Somebody got to say, no, you can't be 80. But anyway, you know, I have an underlying condition. How long am I going to be isolating myself in my home with my wife? I mean, we're not talking now. I don't think 1 week, 2 weeks, we may be talking months. So the anxiety is pretty high, isn't it, for all of us? So that's going to be a question. And I think you're right on target. I mean, uncertainty right now is very powerful as an issue. What else?
Yeah, I agree too with what Jacqueline said on such a deep level. I think not having a timeline is so frustrating. I was listening to a podcast on the way in to work today, and the main theme was we need answers. And that really, as human beings, that kind of guides our judgment. And it's also led to, unfortunately, some issues regarding xenophobia, racial profiling, things like that. That was one of the main themes that emerged in this podcast that said, the argument was, without answers, we start coming up with irrational ideas. So I think living with those own anxieties internally, it's just a tumultuous thing personally for me.
And would be for the students in the support group. The reason I'm asking you to tune into your own feelings as well is that you could be very helpful in tuning into what your participants are going to be experiencing. And I think both Jacqueline and Chuck are right on target. This is part of what it is. What else is going on for people?
I think a lot of us are juggling. So we are all in graduate school. Most of us have families and other obligations, which are normally separated from each other, at least, in categories as like, this is school time, this is work time, this is family time. And everything now is just combined into one big cluster.
Wow.
So it's overwhelming for a lot of people, especially when you're trying to, teach your kids at home, but also teach yourself if you were not already doing online learning. And just being able to wear all the hats at the same time rather than separately. Work,
family, and school. All kinds of things you have to juggle, and doing it online, which may be for a new medium for us, for many of us in doing it. Oh, I think that's very true. Remember, when you lead your groups, these are the kinds of things that you're going to be able to say at the beginning that are illustrations of the kinds of issues your group members may be experiencing. And the idea is not just to talk about how overwhelming it is, but also to ask the group, that's your job, what steps have any of you taken to try to cope with this? And you will find people have been very creative. I'm really amazed right now. For example, I'm on a child welfare board here in New Hampshire, the Division of Children, Youth, and Families. advisory board meets once a month, and I'm in touch with frontline protection workers. And I've been impressed with, number one, the lack of support they're getting, and the problem of being a protection worker at this time, which is huge, but also some of the creative ways they come up with to try to cope with it. I've really been impressed as I talk to them as a member of the advisory board. So I want to look at what Eden is talking about, how overwhelming it is. I want to look at the uncertainty issues, but I also want to ask my group, it's what I call making a demand for work. I want to ask the group to start to think a little bit about what, if anything, have we been able to find to help cope. Am I making sense? I don't want everybody to leave the group more depressed than they started. Depressed as much as they started is okay. But the crucial thing is, as the group leader, what you've got to always present is that there's always a next step. And it might not be a next step that's going to resolve all these issues, but at least it's a step to help us cope with these issues. Am I making sense? Keep going. April, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, no, something that I've noticed, and I think I actually also heard somebody briefly talk about this in a podcast as well, was just one of the things that's happening for me and for a lot of other people I'm talking to is the pandemic in many ways means a lot of things are not what you expected or what you wanted. You had an idea of this is how my life works. This is how family or work or school works. These are my expectations for life. And we don't get some of those things. And then so you're seeing actually a lot of like little processes of grief and loss and adaptation. Like probably it's going to be fine, but might have problems completing field placement. What would that mean? All the fillings with that, adapting to that, there's a lot of adaptation to not getting what we are accustomed to that really does fall into this grief and loss area. And that's something that's really standing out for me when I talk to other people as well.
I think another is just a big adjustment just finishing out the semester, like I think just building off of what Adriel said, like we had an expectation, a syllabus for the semester or a learning contract for us. And now that's been kind of removed in a way that we still have an obligation to fill, but there's a lot of uncertainty with how we're going about doing that. Even for classes that met weekly in person or twice weekly now that are moving to online, just like redefining the expectations of the coursework and the student experience and what we're getting out of this as well, I think is a big thing because we're paying for these experiences. So how are we making sure we're still getting that while also trying to, like Eden said, balance all of those hats, especially like not being able to leave the house, like for people who are working from home, like in what area are you working from home versus where are you doing your schoolwork? Like it can't be where you're relaxing, or it's just all like kind of mushed together. So to keep it separate and keep it focused is definitely a challenge.
Yeah, things have turned upside down, aren't they? One of the things that I'm impressed at with the school, and you could pass that along to Nancy or if you want, is that I think the school is doing some excellent efforts at trying to think about how to do online teaching. And Steve, if you're still listening, everything you put out has been excellent and really helpful. I'm using it in a number of places. So you're at a school, there you are, Steve. So you're at a school that recognizes some of this, that was just raised. Where the hell did he go? There you are, Alex. You're moving around the screen. That has recognized some of this, but you have to now figure out how to make room for it. And if you're still got your family and you got your job and you got all these other things, I think just the thing that Alex just said, it just occurred to me. You might want different places for different things in your house. That's an interesting idea, just so you can get a different mindset. My schoolwork is here, if you have room, and my online work is here. That's an interesting idea. That might be helpful to some folks at this point. Yeah, good. And I'll tell you, they are doing a terrific job. I think UB right now, and Steve and the IT people, many of whom I hired a while back when I was dean, are doing an excellent job at trying to help faculty, because faculty are struggling with exactly the same thing you're talking about. That's what they're trying to do now, figure out how to use this medium and still create a class, Others. This is tuning in, by the way. In other words, if I were leading a peer support group, I would want, and we'll talk about that in a minute, find a way in the very first session to describe the purpose of the peer support group, including the boundaries, my role as a peer, a fellow peer, what my role is. I would want to get some feedback, and what we're tuning into now are the kinds of issues. In my group work experience, I found it helpful, as I did with you, to throw some ideas out right at the beginning. Because just asking what the problems are, people don't always understand what you're asking. So if we threw out some of the things you're just tuning into right now about these issues, that would be a stimulus to help the people in the peer group start to talk about their versions of the very same issues. So that's the advantage if you're having the same struggle. The disadvantage is you're having the same struggle. It goes both ways, but at least you do have pretty good ideas about tuning in. How about others? What else are you? Some folks, I'm trying to remember some of the stuff I read that was really helpful. Financial hardship, for people who aren't getting an income right now, and they're trying to cope with that and still cope with school.
And Larry, can I add something quickly?
Go ahead.
Concern about other people in our lives that depend on us, or, are more vulnerable. Sometimes that's harder for us than just thinking of. I'm echoing what a student said, but it really resonated with me. Sometimes concern for ourselves is easier to cope with than the fear and anxiety we have about loved ones.
Yes, that student put out a concern about grandparents, for example, or parents,
Parents, yes.
And going through that. When I read that, I was thinking from the other perspective. I have adult kids, and I have an 18-year-old grandson. And of course, I'm concerned about them at this point. Do I share my concerns with them? Probably not. Should I? Maybe I should. My concerns about the things I'm struggling with. So when I read that, it occurred to me, and that's what my reaction was that I'm trying to protect them. I figured they have enough troubles on their own. Why should I let them know what I'm concerned about? But I think that's wrong. I think I really should find a way to let them know what I'm concerned about, that so that there's a mutual sense of concern. I don't know if I'm making sense or not. I may be rambling right now, but that was my association. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Margie.
I just want to add, and some of you that are I heard some of you in hospital settings. I know I talked to a student, so this is something that could come up in the peer support group as an issue. Is one of the students is dealing with some of the things Eden and some of you have talked about, getting through classes, trying to do field, having family members, and add to that being someone in the healthcare setting who's responding to crisis and COVID, and worrying about the stress of their health and the health of their families when they're coming home,
Right.
and having enough space. And, I can't even imagine that on top of, everything else.
Yes, I think at least a couple of you were, one of you were in an emergency room. So therefore you're facing this day in and day out, the shortage of the what is it, PPEs? Did I get that right? Shortage of equipment, protection. How do I protect myself? I mean, I have to say at least one of the positive outcomes of this is people have begun to appreciate what gets done by people on the front line, whether they're first responders in fire trucks or in police cars or in emergency rooms, etc. We're just starting to really understand what a task they have all the time and what they're dealing with right now. So certainly if one of the participants in your group was struggling with that, that would be a good thing to talk about. How do they help? If it's not them, but it's a friend of theirs, or what kind of things could they do that might be helpful to their friends at a time like that? Are you seeing that no matter what you're raising, I am always consistently looking for some small next step? The only thing I can't accept as a professional, or you can't accept, is that it's hopeless. Understand? That's the part I don't want to convey. Is it hard? Yes. Is it hopeless? No. Am I making sense on that as well? And how many months do we have to the election? If we still have an election, don't get me started. To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever been as fearful about democracy in all my years, as I am right now. And this is why we have to fight. We just have to fight. We can't give it up that easily. Being overwhelmed ourselves, we can't give up the fight that has to be done to make sure we hang on to our democracy. All right, that speech is over. I got that over. How about any others? Are you getting this? Oh, go ahead, Brandy.
I just wanted to put it out there that I think it's expected that we'll have anxieties and stress and some uncertainty and grief and loss show up. And one thing I've noticed with my own peers is that what's showing up is a lot of that guilt as well, of possibly being able to work from home and not the loss of job, or being an online student and not being impacted the way other students or other peers may have. And so listening to some of the cycle of grief and loss is right there. And I feel like we should also be mindful of just what shows up around that guilt and shame as well.
Well, yeah. And, compared to some other folks, we've got it a lot not easy, but a lot easier. I'm sitting here in my house with my wife, and we're saying, okay, we could be trapped in this house for quite a long time, but it's a nice house. I got a great view of the lake. We're not worried about where our meals are coming from. We can go out with masks and once every 10 days shop. So yeah, life is not like we want it, but boy, there are a lot of people who have it a lot worse. I think that's a really good point that Brandy's making, about the fact that there could be a sense of guilt, which you shouldn't have, but it's still there. Anyone else? Well, and okay, was that Michael? Michael, will you just jump in here or not? Oh, he's muted.
Sorry, I was just stretching. I'm sitting so much is really hard on me.
Oh,
Sorry to complain.
I said that, as a teacher, I think my class is a group. I've written a stuff called The Hidden Group in the Classroom. And I've been very conscious of the fact that as I teach, I'm modeling what I believe in working with a group. It's an educational group, it's not a therapeutic group, et cetera. And I sometimes get a little bit overly anxious to pick up nonverbal cues. So some poor people might be sitting there and they make a move and I say, oh, is there something you wanted to say, Michael? No, I just was a little uncomfortable. I moved around, okay. And so as soon as I do that too often, my class sits like this. And you can't see it. They're not going to move. They're afraid if they move, I'm going to call on them. And it takes about a week or so before they realize, no, I'm not going to do it. It's okay. So sorry about that, Michael. Feel free to stand up, by the way, and walk around.